The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hi, and welcome to Wonderfully Made. My name is Cheryl McWilliams. Our guest today is Dr. Timothy Howe from Parkview Adventist Medical Center. Welcome, Dr. Howe.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Good. We're going to be talking about the immune system today, which I find intensely interesting. It's a system that I don't know a lot about, but I understand works really hard to keep me and all of our viewers healthy.
Absolutely.
So help me understand how it works.
The immune system is a very complex and interesting system. I suppose the easiest way to understand it is to think of your immune system as your military. As in the military, there are various branches of your immune system. You have the command center. That would be a specialized type of lymphocyte called the T lymphocytes. You have the infantry, if you will, the ground forces, call them what you will. Those would be the phagocytes. Phago means to eat, cyte means cell. Those are the cell eaters, or actually the cells which eat, neutrophils, macrophages. Then you have B cells. They're a type of lymphocyte as well, and they work under the direction of the T cells, and they manufacture antibodies. Antibodies are very interesting compounds. They have two arms, and they have, if you will, hands. These hands are very specialized. They are particularly designed to identify one and only one invader that would be coming into your body. Let's say that someone comes, or a bacteria comes and tries to get into your body. If your body has been exposed to that before and made antibodies to that bacteria, once that bacteria is picked up by a macrophage, which is really, the macrophages are eaters, but they are also border patrol. The macrophages are found under our skin. They're also found along the blood vessels. When they're inside the blood itself, we give them a different name. We call them monocytes, but they do the same thing. They pick up these invaders, these not you, if you will, bacteria, viruses, pollen on occasion. They take it in their hand and present it to a T cell for identification, unless it's been there before. If it's been there before, the body recognizes it almost instantly, and the B cells start churning out millions and millions of antibodies. One B cell can make as many as 10 million antibodies in an hour.
Wow. That
floods into your system. Any of those foreign invaders are tagged. As soon as the antibody latches onto them, they are marked for death. The antibody attaches, that marks them as an invader, and then the host of phagocytes come out and chew, and eat them up and destroy them. Actually, they pull them inside and dissolve them inside the macrophage or the neutrophil primarily. It's a very interesting system. It's important for the system to be able to tell the difference between what's you and what's not you. And in the not you category, to tell the difference between what's a danger and what's not a danger. Of course, there are many things that find their way inside that aren't a danger, like dust particles. They're not a danger, but sometimes the immune system gets a little bit confused and mounts a reaction to that. We call that allergies. Allergies are really the immune system on hyper alert and a little confused as to what is you and not you, and in that not you category, what's dangerous and not dangerous.
So it sounds like this is a pretty complex system, but it's one that's very, very, very important to keep me safe and to keep me well.
Absolutely. You know, Cheryl, if you don't have an immune system, if you're born without one, you don't live long. Even if you're in total isolation from any bacteria or viral particles or fungus or any other pathogens, as we call them, even if you're in total isolation from those, you still have cancer. And cancer is almost you. In fact, it was you, but it has changed and become something that is not good for you. And the immune system needs to identify that too.
Interesting. So how does the immune system try to keep me free of cancer?
The immune system has specialized cells that look throughout your body, looking for aberrations in the coating of the cell wall. Because when you have a mutation inside the cell, often you have a mutation outside the cell as well. When you're small, your body has to get to know you, and it does that primarily through the T cells. T cells are lymphocytes that come from the bone marrow and go to the thymus gland, which is right here, low in your neck, high in your chest. And there they are instructed, God knows how, we don't understand it completely, in what is you and what is not you. And for the rest of their lives, which T cells are very long-lived, they help us detect what's you, what's not you, what's cancerous, and what's not cancerous. But if the immune system gets depressed by anything, and they lose that sharp ability to detect the cells in your bodies that have changed, or if, on the other hand, more and more cancer cells are produced and they're overwhelmed in their ability to identify the cancer cells, then we're at increased risk for cancer.
So what I hear you saying is that we are all exposed to cancer cells on a fairly regular basis, and that something happens that causes these cells to not be identified by the immune system or to not work well?
That's correct. They estimate that each of us has a cell or two or three, as many, some people think, as 6 or more incidences per day of cells developing a mutation and becoming potentially cancerous. Fortunately, our immune system gets the majority of those and destroys them before they can become a problem for us. We are incredibly well made, well designed, and despite the multiple problems, our immune system can go in there, destroy the cell that's changed, and we keep living very well for many years.
Okay, I now have a very strong respect for my immune system. What can I do to strengthen it or to make sure it stays healthy?
You know, we talk a lot about diet, and diet is important, but let's start with an article that was published in the summer issue of Journal Advancement in Medicine in 1995, a very interesting article. In this study, they took a group of people and they wanted to test their immune system function. Specifically, they wanted to look at an antibody called IgA. IgA that they measured was found in the saliva. But IgA is also found in the nasal secretions, it's found in the tears of the tear ducts, it's found in the alimentary canal or in the GI tract, it's found under the skin. In essence, IgA is the first line of defense against infection. So it's very, very important. They took these people and they said to them, we want you to think back to a time in your life when you felt very distressed, when you felt unloved, when you felt hurt someone had done something terrible to you, and it was just a very bad time in your life. Now, Cheryl, I don't want you to think about a time like that, and you'll see why shortly. They measured their salivary IgA levels before this, then they had them concentrate, really get into reliving that bad experience for just 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, they measured their salivary IgA levels, and they found that within 15 minutes of that 5-minute time, when they thought back to that bitter, bad time in their life, their salivary IgA levels fell by 70%.
Wow.
And did not return to baseline for 5 hours. It's very important what you think about.
A merry heart doeth good like medicine.
A merry heart doeth good like a medicine. You know, they took the same group of people. Fortunately, they didn't end with that study alone. They took the same group of people and they said, now we want you to think back to a time in your life when you felt really loved. And it was just a wonderful time. You felt accepted, and it was just the best. Get into those feelings for 5 minutes and relive that experience. And they found that their salivary IgA level of the people that thought back to a time like that in their lives went up by 80% and didn't return to normal for 5 hours. Now, there's several very important things in this study. One is, of course, we need to be careful what we think about. We need to choose our thoughts carefully. And the memories we have, we need to be careful that we don't take time reviewing all the bad stuff in our life. Now, maybe some of you never had a bad happening. That's wonderful. I have a few things that's important for me not to think about in my life because I want my immune system healthy. But the other interesting thing about this study is it points out that every single white blood cell has neurochemical receptors on it. Every white cell is under the direct control of our minds.
Wow.
As the Bible says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. We could add, as you think in your heart, or as you think, so is your immune system. Very, very important. And we find that many people come down with cancer, not just because of exposure, but after a stressful time in their life, when they, instead of dealing with it and moving on and concentrating on the better things of life, focused on the negative, their immune system was depressed, and cancer escaped surveillance and grew. Very, very important for us to be careful what we think about for our immune system strength and health. Very important.
So there really is a connection then between the mind and our body. I know we say this, but there are very tangible connections there.
There are very close links between our mind and our body. Sometimes we forget this, but it's important. That connection is almost instantaneous. You think about what happened. It's the B cells that were making those antibodies. They got the signal from the brain, bad time. Oh, painful time. And the B cells stopped making IgA. The IgA levels fell. On the second experiment, the B cells got the message from the brain. Good times, wonderful times. And they started producing IgA and made lots more. It reminds me of that wonderful chapter in Ministry of Healing, Mind Cure. In that chapter, Ellen White makes the statement, nothing tends more to promote health of body and soul than does a spirit of gratitude and praise. You know, I used to need faith to believe in that book, Ministry of Healing. I don't really need faith anymore because I have science that shows me page after page that what that book says is true today.
Absolutely.
And that study shows it. But it's good for us to remember, if you want to be healthy, if you want to have a healthy, vigorous immune system, think positively, change the very cells in your body with your thoughts.
And I appreciated you bringing up the Ministry of Healing. For any of our viewers who have not had the pleasure of reading that book, I highly recommend it. I find it absolutely fascinating that it was written more than 100 years ago, and science is just now validating everything that's in there. So very good information. I recently had a family member who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so this whole cancer conversation is very interesting to me. Tell me a little bit about breast cancer and maybe how the immune system works with that.
Well, Cheryl, let's take a moment and step away from the immune system and look at population studies on breast cancer. Anyone with cancer, of course, we want to have a vigorous immune system. Even if you've been diagnosed with it, if you take steps to improve your immune system function with diet, with exercise, with careful thoughts, you'll improve your chance of survival. If you don't have cancer, you will improve your risk or decrease your risk to get cancer. But let's step away from that for a moment and look a little more at diet and what it does, because it influences the rate at which those cells become cancerous. And of course, if you have a military in your body, the immune system, and the world is at peace, your immune system can rest. But even if you have the best immune system in the world, there are going to be some casualties if there's war broken out. So what can we do to reduce the chance of a breakout of cancer, or if you will, a conflict erupting in our body? Let's look at that for a moment and look at it with breast cancer. Breast cancer is very closely linked to estrogen levels. Now we know this because men have breasts as well. They're just not developed. The reason they're not developed, of course, is because men don't have the same level of estrogen that women do. And men have 100 times less risk of developing breast cancer than women. In the last 20 years, I've diagnosed 2 men with breast cancer, but many more women, unfortunately. Why is it, of course, that some women get breast cancer and others don't? We hear a lot about genetics today. There's the BRCA, that stands for breast cancer gene. There's the BRCA1 and the BRCA2 genes, and those are very important. If you have one of those genetic abnormalities, you have a 50% risk, plus or minus, in getting breast cancer. And some people say, well, breast cancer is all in the genes. Not really. In fact, only about 2 to 3% of all cancer, breast cancer included, is genetic. The BRCA gene occurs only in 1 in 500 women. Another question to ask with that is, why do only 50% of people with the BRCA gene get cancer? What about the 50% that don't? What are they doing in their lives not to get cancer? I think one of the most interesting studies in breast cancer was done by Dr. T. Colin Campbell. It's called the China study. And he found that in Chinese, they had a much lower risk, Chinese women, of breast cancer than their Western counterparts. That is, you take Chinese women and move them from China, rural China is where he did his studies, and move them to the West, and their rates of breast cancer go up markedly. You don't change their genetics that fast, but you do change their risk of breast cancer. And what he found is, in the rural Chinese women, he found about a 26 to 63% lower estrogen level than in their Western counterparts. That is, than in Chinese women who had moved to the West and were eating our diets.
Interesting.
If the estrogen level is lower, the risk of breast cancer is lower. The other thing that was interesting about these people is their menstruation started later. The average age for a woman to start menstruating in this country is 11 years of age.
Wow.
In China, rural China, the average age in T. Colin Campbell's study was 17. A huge difference if you think about it. 6 more years without estrogen. And he found on the end of life, not the end, but the end of menstruation, the Chinese women stopped menstruating or went through menopause about 4 to 5 years earlier than their Western counterparts. So you have two factors here in the Chinese study. You have a shortening of the exposure to estrogen, and you have a lowering of the total amount of estrogen. The interesting thing that the Chinese study pointed out was it was diet that made the difference in the estrogen levels. If you change the diet, you change the estrogen level. And the biggest factor in breast cancer development being estrogen, the biggest dietary factor was animal protein. As the animal protein intake increased, the estrogen level increased. As the estrogen level increased, the breast cancer risk increased. The take-home lesson from the Chinese study isn't really about immune system. That is critically important. It's about diet. Interestingly, if you have a lower animal protein, you also have a lower animal fat. You're also eating more complex carbohydrates, more fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, and your immune system is doing better as well. Cancer risk goes down, and your ability to resist cancer also goes down. That explains why in rural China, the breast cancer rates are much, much lower than they are in Western Chinese women and in American women as well.
Interesting. I had the great fortune of living in China for quite some time and definitely found a difference in the diet there compared to where I grew up. In fact, I don't think I've ever eaten quite as healthfully as I did there with the fresh fruits and vegetables, very little animal protein. It was unaffordable there, so fascinating. Whenever I think of breast cancer, that generally also causes me to think about prostate cancer. And gentlemen, so what is the effect or role there?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Cheryl. Not many men get breast cancer, and not many women get prostate cancer.
That's right.
And that's a good thing, you know. Prostate cancer is another interesting disease, and it's also looked at in the China study to some extent, but there are many studies now on prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is increasingly diagnosed in this country because of a new enzyme assay called the prostate-specific antigen. That's actually not so new today, but it's still used very widely, and we can detect cancer quite early with this. We also detect a lot of things that aren't cancer, prostate hypertrophy, prostate irritation, but it's a good screening tool. The question comes, what can we do to lower prostate cancer risk and the development of prostate cancer? Because, you know, about 50% of men 70 years of age have prostate cancer. That doesn't mean that all of them will die with it. Fortunately, not all of the men 70 years of age that have prostate cancer will die from it. Many will die with it. Because prostate cancer is different than breast cancer. It's usually, though not always, it's usually slow-growing and a chronic disease that doesn't take your life. Not always. And what they found in every study, just about, is that there's one factor that increases your risk for prostate cancer, and it increases your risk of having an aggressive form of prostate cancer. Harvard published an interesting review of all the literature on prostate cancer, and they said there is one thing that is universally associated with increased risk of prostate cancer and increased risk of aggressive prostate cancer, and that one thing is dairy intake. Dairy intake. If you want to avoid prostate cancer, avoid intake of dairy protein. Now, many people are vegetarian and think, well, I'm fine, I don't eat meat. Well, no, but how about dairy protein? Dairy protein not only increases prostate cancer in men, it also increases breast cancer in women. And as T. Colin Campbell found in his research on liver cancer and on aflatoxins, it's that casein, the dairy protein, that increases your risk of liver cancer and many other cancers. Because in milk, not only do you have the protein, you have an insulin-like growth factor that signals growth and frequently increases your risk for developing any cancer.
Interesting. I recently had my very first colonoscopy, and it was not very exciting. And I immediately thought about colon cancer. So let's talk about that briefly.
You know, as far as colonoscopy is concerned, many people come into my office and they say, I really don't want a colonoscopy. And I say, good, you're normal. If you wanted a colonoscopy, I'd really worry about you. But as Tim Sample in Maine says, a colonoscopy is sort of like a Maine winter. It's not fun, but you'll get through it. Well, colonoscopies are really important for screening, but more important than screening is prevention, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, it's the same story again. We used to think it was fiber. Dr. Burkett, many years ago, did wonderful research looking at fiber, but we now know that fiber is really a marker for something else. Same thing as in the other two cancers, it's protein intake. Protein intake raises your risk for colon cancer. That was found very clearly in a study done in South Africa. A 17-fold increase in cancer in the white South Africans because of the meat intake. Oh, we need to be careful what we eat. We need to be careful what we think. We need to remember God loves us. He's given us the best diet possible in Genesis. Fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, whole grains, and nuts. If we eat those, we will reduce our risk of cancer. We'll feel better now and in the future.
So, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. And if we focus on the information that we've been given, not only in this program, but in books like The Ministry of Healing, then we can prevent our risk of cancer and other diseases as well. So thank you for being with us today, Dr. Howe, and thank you, guests, for joining us today on Wonderfully Made, and may God bless you.